Commissioners Finance Committee today, Wednesday, August 5. And I guess we don't do a roll call in these meetings, but we do have minutes to approve in hand from July 22. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve those minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, we'll move into today's topic of discussion, that is the renewed Cumberland Grant CARES Act application submissions. And we have some distinguished guests with us today, our task force members, and our COVID coordinator, Gary Chicatano. And Gary, you're going to speak to this issue regarding the allocations. So I'll turn it over to you and we'll have questions then.
Well, thank you. So we're here today for two reasons, as you said, to talk about the allocation and also give you an update on the progress of the Cumberland County Renew project. And if you recall back when you first started dealing with this project, what you did was designated what we keep referring to as buckets of funding: nonprofit, small business and tourism, municipalities, behavioral health and drug and alcohol, and county government. And I want to say up front that the commitment that you've shown to this project is fantastic. You've given us the resources that we need as a task force to establish the framework that we believe is objective, fair, and equitable, and will get the funding to the people who need it the most in a timely manner. Members of the task force have worked tirelessly for the last several weeks. Truly, they were keeping in mind what is best for the citizens of Cumberland County. And today, the task force lead folks are here with me so that they can answer any specific questions that you might have. And let me explain that we've broken this down into teams. First team is task force lead is Dana Best, and she's handling county funding, the compliance, and the monitoring. Kirk Stoner is handling the municipal funding. Jamie Keener is handling the small business and tourism funds, and Jack Carroll is handling the nonprofits and behavioral health funding. We will be glad to answer any questions that you have at any time, certainly at the end of what we're going to present to you today. Excuse me. Again, we believe that what we've developed is a very objective process, and it's a very thorough screening of the applications to ensure the eligibility with the guidelines that we've been provided by both the federal and the state government officials. Most of the applications that we received were done very thoughtfully. It was obvious that the applicants reviewed the information that we put out, and they stuck to the guidelines that they were given. Some not so much, but those are the ones that we're working on screening right now. The application portal that we built was very user-friendly, with very few questions, because we added tooltips, and that was thanks to Dana and the IT folks, so that when they went to fill out their application, the cursor hovered over the tooltip, and it gave them answers that they were looking for. So it was very well done. Several layers of the review are occurring so that only legitimate applications are being considered. There's also a very thorough screening process being put in place by the compliance committee before any checks are issued. So there's multiple layers of review, multiple screenings by both the task force member and those folks who will be in the compliance part of this. The numbers we're showing you today are preliminary numbers, and that's because we're still screening. And now we're doing our deep dive and really getting into the applications. That will continue till the end of next week. And then we'll be meeting at the end of next week. When I say we, task force chairs will be meeting next week Some of the applications will be eliminated, and that's because of the thorough review we're doing. There are some applicants, for example, for nonprofit money that are not 501c3. So they will be eliminated from consideration because definitely that's required. Portal is open from the 16th of July to the 30th. And if you look at the one sheet you were doing in the packets, applications received, these are the numbers that we have as of today. So we have requests for $32,864,030 from a total of 682 applicants. And you can see the breakdown by category. Those numbers will not hold true because of the elimination we'll do through the screening process.
Gary, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
For the municipality number of 23 applications, is that 23 separate municipalities, David?
I'm gonna ask Kurt to answer that.
Yeah, actually, it's 22,
Okay.
but it's 22 separate municipalities.
All right, that's good.
Some municipalities can only put in one, okay, like chose to put in one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gary.
So any given municipality only chose to put in one, or they were?
That's correct, yep.
Thanks.
Okay. So the amount that's requested is about $10 million more than we have to distribute. And we need to now really start surgically looking at these and going through, making sure they're valid, and then make a determination on how much money we can offer to each of the applicants who have submitted the ballot applications. So the second document you have is funding recommendations. And this is purely our recommendation. You can choose to go with it or come up with something else, but point in the process we are now, we need an answer as to where you want to benchmark these funds. We did this based on what we're saying with the applications, how much we requested in each bucket, how many applications there were, things like that. We didn't do any percentages because they would be skewed based on some applications that were really kind of out of the ballpark and over the top. So what we came up with was a recommendation that we hope you adopt today for $22,395,000, which still gives us roughly $500,000 of wiggle room, and also some flexibility so that if we find out, for example, that municipalities don't need 850, they only need 750, we can take 100,000 of that and recommend to you that we put that in small businesses or more for nonprofits. So at this point, before we come to you with final recommendations on the 19th, we're looking for that benchmark, but yet some ability to have some wiggle room there. So our plan again is to come back to you on the 19th with final recommendations for you to fund. And if during this week that we're doing the deep dive in the applications, we think that we should make some major changes to the buckets of funding, we would come back to you next Wednesday, or meeting 12, and make a different recommendation. But we need a starting point from today on. So once that process is all finished, finance department will be doing their due diligence review, and then the contracts will be sent to successful applicants, and we can begin to issue checks. So we're trying to get these checks on the street as quickly as we possibly can, but only after we do our due diligence, and we're sure that every applicant is a legitimate applicant with a legitimate need for funding. And that's our goal. After the checks are issued, there'll be extensive monitoring that's been required. And the data is handling all of that. That's outside of my scope of knowledge, and she and her team are handling that. And we're obviously trying to work within all the guidelines that we've been given by the feds and the state. We believe that this process has turned out to be very, very objective, very fair, very equitable, given the time frame that we had to put it together. I think we've done a very good job of doing it the right way, in a way that you as commissioners can be proud of, and I will say that the folks that I've had the opportunity to work with in the county have been incredibly talented people who are very devoted to this county and have done an excellent job. And I've worked with a lot of people in my career, and I can tell you these are some of the most talented people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And that's why we are where we are today. It's because of them. So with that, I will just open it up for questions that you may have on myself or task force chairs.
Carrie, I have a question. You said some of the applicants were not 501c3s. So my first question is, what were they? And then how many of those applicants were not eligible?
We're in the process of determining that right now, Gene.
Okay.
There are some who said they were 501c3s. And when we checked the Department of State database, they are not.
Okay.
And we also checked the IRS database,
Okay.
and they're not.
Okay.
They're not registered. So they're saying they are, really not. I don't know exactly how many that is at this point, and I wouldn't want to speculate until we do our final review.
Okay. But are you going back to them and asking them about that?
Jack, I'm gonna ask Jack to answer that because he's chairing that section. Do you know if that has been done at all?
No, not to my knowledge. No.
We just checked the databases.
Okay. I just wonder if it would be a good idea to go back to them and ask them about it. And then they can either confirm or deny.
Sure.
I know it's extra work.
Mm-hmm.
I just would hate for someone to be denied based upon what we think is, what we think is correct or accurate, and then it not be what we think or what we found is not correct or accurate.
Well, I think we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
I guess as a follow-up on that too, but again, I know this potentially could mean extra work, but are we, when we look at these ones that are getting kicked off, is there a plan to at least examine whether they're eligible in another category, or is that just kind of?
We have done that.
You have done?
We have done that. In fact, yesterday, as a matter of fact, there were 4 that were moved from one bucket to another bucket.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right. So that, and that will likely continue as you do.
That's correct, yeah. They're all being reviewed for that reason.
Good. All right. So we're not just blankly.
No, we're just not,
All right. Good.
just counting.
Gary or Dana, when all the decisions are made, when will the funds start to be dispersed? September?
I'm gonna say, it depends on a lot of things. One is when we make the decision, when you guys make the decision on who the applicants are, then the contracts will go out to the vendors. It will depend on how fast they get the
Okay.
contracts back to us.
Gotcha.
But we've been kind of saying allow 6 to 8 weeks. We're hopeful that we can get it done in a lot shorter time. And we're trying to figure out some automation that we can do to upload some things to increase it. But we really need to take the time to make sure that we're checking the vendors through Clear and the different things, and that's man-hour intensive.
Okay.
So, I would, probably 4 weeks would be the shortest turnaround if all the planets align, but 8 weeks is probably a legitimate, because I figure it,
That seems reasonable.
I have a few questions. So, as you go through your evaluative process, it seems to me that a number of these folks, especially if they have an attached documentation that's been requested, could very well fall off the ultimate list of who's considered. Is that right?
If they haven't provided documentation that's been requested, they have been contacted.
They have already been contacted.
They have been contacted and asked to provide the additional documentation. Now, if they don't do that,
Yeah,
then we'll,
okay. They would just come off the list if because they probably aren't eligible and,
right.
have discovered that somehow along the way, so. But that being the case, it seems to me that the potential is for some of these target allocations maybe to change considerably. So we're giving you a preliminary target allocation approval today, but can we then see how much those numbers change after you've done the?
Absolutely.
Okay,
That's our plan.
okay, just
Yeah, our
making
plan
sure.
is to come back to you with, here's our recommendation.
Okay, all right, that helps. This is a tougher one. So you've got very clear criteria on the business side, you know, and that relates to their financial condition and such. Those criteria won't necessarily hold, they won't be the criteria you use on some of the other.
Oh, absolutely.
So how are you, in coming up with the allocations, do you have a method for sort of bridging the differences in criteria?
Well, the differences in criteria apply to the different buckets of funding.
Yeah.
So there's a different criteria for the nonprofits
Right.
than there is for the small businesses and tourism. The questions are very different for the behavioral health
Yeah.
and nonprofit than they are for the small business. So then, you know, the scoring is based on those questions and the rubrics that we came up with.
That makes perfect sense. The limitation there is, it makes sense within its category. So when you got, to arrive at your preliminary targets, there's obviously some head-to-head comparison that's gonna go on between the different categories, and that's where, you know, that gets very difficult.
Right.
I'm frankly, not sure how I would do it.
Our plan at this point is for the team leads and myself to meet
Yeah.
on the 14th and try to work that out.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask that is to me, it would be kind of a shame if we, because we've set target allocations, that we accept what is frankly a lesser need in one category while shortchanging another category. So, you know, doing that head-to-head comparison can be difficult. And I'll tell you what drove that question actually is, the county government category in particular, we had requests for $6,233,000 and change, if you consider, you know, $655 change. And the target allocation, preliminary target allocation is $5,700,000, so that's roughly, what, $500,000 plus. So, being county government, we don't necessarily want this to become a self-serving proposition. However, one of the key reasons this CARES funding was enacted was because the counties are absorbing a great deal of cost that we normally would not. So I guess my question is, I would like to know what we're shortchanging to the tune of $500,000 within county government, because that is our purview here is county government. And just as importantly, if it results in a shortfall, that could very well, if they are necessary expenses, they will be lowered in the general fund, which, you know, potentially could be a tax increase that's gonna be paid by these exact same entities. I think we obviously have to weigh that as an outlying factor. So, I'm hopeful we'll get some detail. Dana, did you want to speak to this now?
I can take that. I
Okay.
actually have the details if you wanna see them. I have a spreadsheet and I have the start of a PowerPoint for when we get to the point where we make our recommendation.
Okay,
But in that county money, it's a combination of, what was requested by county departments for capital and different things. And then we have a central bucket that basically facilities, IMTO, and finance has been managing for PPE and laptops and different things. In addition, we have a contingency, and there's 3 buckets of contingency. One of them is basically, we have county general fund expenses that are backing it, so that if we don't have anything happen and it's not used, we will use it to offset expenses that are eligible under the CARES Act, and we've already incurred. Then there is a bucket similarly for the nursing home, because they're getting a lot of money through Medicare, and you ask them to create and ask for additional funding. But if they end up getting $3 million more or something, this money isn't the appropriate bucket, so we have that set in a contingency.
I was actually gonna ask about that, so.
Right. And then there's another, it's like 85,000, and I'd have to look to see exactly which department it is. But it's the same type of thing, there's expenses backing it,
Yeah.
but it's a program that may have, I think it's MHIDD actually, that may actually have other funding, and so we're waiting to see if that happens. So, we would recommend moving forward with that if the other funding falls through, but if it doesn't, we wanna put it in somebody else's bucket. And then there are some requests that are actually, I'm gonna call them external requests. They're not really for county departments, they're county departments requesting them, but it's for external things.
Oh,
The central library came through us because they're not really a 501c3, so they have some asks. MHIDD put in a couple of asks for the human services as a whole, for like homelessness and some other things. So there are some external type things that are in our bucket, but we're gonna go through and look at those closely. And the way we kind of do it is there's some real easy yeses, we would recommend that. And then there's some real easy no's, we don't recommend that either, because you've already made the decision, or, that it wasn't made when it was asked for, but the decision has since been made. And so we know that we can get this down by at least $400,000 right off the top, because we know one program is denied already. So we are looking at it from the perspective of making sure that we are kind of taking care of the county, because we know we're not getting other funding, but also making sure that we're not hitting the other buckets too far. Like, we don't want to keep it all for ourselves.
Sure.
And there is more funding that we could put into this request, but we tried to create a balance.
Sure.
And then we learned yesterday from the DCED that on December 1st, any money that's not spent, they're gonna hand it over to the counties, which we have till December 30th still to spend it. So we probably will create more of a second, I'm gonna call it a second tier, whereas whatever we would need to do already has contract signed or whatever, so that we can have it expended by December 30th. Haven't had a lot of time to think about that, that's after we
Yeah.
get,
Very interesting.
after we get through and get everything moving, then we probably should get back together and say, okay, of what we did not fund, that has already been spent, if we had more money, what would we want to fund if anything falls through?
We just became aware of that yesterday.
Yesterday.
Right, all
That
right.
was the
Yeah.
part of the call.
Yes.
Call everybody was waiting on the conference call.
Yeah.
Okay. The one question I think I raised before, I think would become very relevant in that situation, and that is, are they gonna provide additional guidance on what, if you wanna call it leftovers? You know, we obviously don't wanna have to turn that back, so are they gonna provide us guidance on ways in which it could be applied? I specifically have brought about the idea of maybe we could establish something revolving loan program that would still be available for COVID recovery, but not necessarily be assigned yet, because we don't know what the need would be, because it's a fluid situation.
The same rules would apply, it has to be spent by.
So they
December
made it
30th.
clear there's not gonna be any, okay.
Right, so it has to be something that's already done, and I think that we can do that. The difficulty will be, I'll use the business as an example, if they're not approved initially in ours, and they get other funding, if we would use that specific business as our backup, and they have already found other funding, then they would be ineligible, because you can't double dip.
Okay.
And that's what the biggest difficulty will be with that money. But we'll have a plan to try to make sure, and it could be as simple as we go through all of our county expenses that we didn't even try to get reimbursed for, and just create a running list. And apply it to that. For example, we may be able to put almost all of the prison expenses in there because we had to spread out. So and that's a change in budget, right? It's not, we did have the positions budgeted, but we had them budgeted for a census, for 400 and whatever, and it went down substantially, but we didn't go down in the number of cells. So that is then eligible for CARES.
Okay. Good, sounds like you guys have really anticipated virtually every scenario that I envisioned questioning, so, kudos on that. The only other point I would make is that, you know, I noticed too, that we're municipalities, we're under there by a fair amount, so, and whoever gets kicked off the list, for lack of a better term, is who we're gonna hear from. And obviously, you know, we're not in this to do the picking, but we do have oversight to it. So we're gonna get the questions. So, hopefully, we can get some good information to ensure that once those questions come in, why didn't we get ours? That we can have a good, solid answer for those things.
Not a problem.
Okay. That's everything I can.
Jerry, I did see an email this morning, and I didn't look at it as closely as I could have, but it looked like on August 10th, there's new small business money coming out.
Yeah, so that was discussed on the meeting, or on the call yesterday as well. So it's a second round of the small business assistance program that the governor put out through the CDFIs.
Okay,
So there was one, I think that closed a couple days before ours opened, but then they were doing round two. Now, what they mentioned yesterday is that they want us to provide our list of all the businesses that are going to get funded. We need to supply our list to DCED so they can cross-reference with that small business assistance grant program. So if they got funding through that, they would not be able to get it through the county. So
okay.
I'm not sure which one they would get. If they already got it in the phase one, then they wouldn't be able to get ours, and the county, the DCED would let us know that. So there may be, if you approve a certain amount, there may be applicants that need to be pulled off of there once DCED reviews it. So again, that's been our biggest concern about all these programs, that there's duplication and replication of applications. So I was glad to hear that they were not gonna, that they were actually gonna do the task of checking to see if they got other funds.
Okay.
And I think that'll be part of our grant agreement process too. Did you get any other CARES funds that might conflict with you getting this? So, yeah, they would have to self-report other than what DCED might fund.
It's been really interesting just trying to keep track of what's out there and all the balls that are in the air from all these different types of funds. And they keep coming at us all the time.
During the call, did they by chance address more money possibly coming in November? No?
Talking about what they'll, I guess, called surplus that we would not know about until December 1st.
Okay.
I was hoping that they would say that the December 30th date was going to change for spending it.
Yeah.
But they were pretty adamant yesterday that it was not.
That could still change, but.
I believe the federal government would have to change it for it to change for us.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
well, as you stated a minute ago, there's just so many players here, so many hands, so many programs. That brings up the importance of the sharing as much information among the players as we can, which you alluded to, it's what the second round will involve. To the question that had come up before about applications that are, shall we say, questionable in terms of their legality. So is there any, do we know if there's any guidance being provided on a means of sharing that information? So that, I know you had sent something over to CCAP, but does the state have any mechanism by which to share information regarding questionable applications that might be landing in
Not that I'm aware of.
applicants, just so they to address that at all? Okay. We don't know if we should share that information with DCED or with CCAP or.
No, I guess with that one in particular, I was hoping that CCAP would say, well, this should also go to DTED. I haven't talked to Lisa. She called your office and I think she was going to try to reach out to me, but I haven't heard from her yet.
call which office?
I'm sorry?
Who'd she call?
She called Commissioner's office because when I first sent her the email, it went encrypted
Oh, right.
because there was an attachment to it.
Yes.
Yeah. Still not that familiar with county email system.
Yeah, it's
So I reached
creating a lot of
out.
surprises for us lately too, because I sent something to the governor's regional director, and she sent me a note saying, did you just send me some mail?
Yeah.
At least they're being careful.
So I resent it to her unencrypted.
Good,
At
okay.
least I think I tried.
Back to the point about other funding, you know, supposedly there's another CARES Act being considered. And I know that the restaurants have been pushing really hard to get dedicated funding to restaurants. There are quite a few restaurants in the small business grant application. So there's, again, a potential conflict, but we don't know that. So we're moving forward as though there is no other funding available. And then they would have to deal with, and I think they actually, DCD actually said, if they're eligible up to, say, $100,000 in one program and they only get 50 in another, they could actually get that other 50 in that other program. So as long as they're not expending their total eligibility within.
And here's a question that's, I've wondered about a few times, but, I mean, restaurants are among the most, well, in any economy, they're among the most high in terms of failure rates anyhow. Their sustainability is not great. So is there any, are we trying to differentiate restaurants? Is there any criteria, or are we just giving money to all restaurants? Do they have to have a certain history or a certain profitability, or, you know,
So
it's
that's-
like, we're
that's-
throwing good money after bad?
Yeah, no, that's all part of our evaluation,
Yeah.
the criteria, so it's years in business, you get a higher ranking, profitability, you get a higher ranking, number of employees, and then we're also evaluating the economic impact as far as, the number of other jobs that might be impacted if they were to close, so. Yeah, so it's built into our, we're calling it a risk ranking.
Okay, yeah.
So it's, and they are restaurants, hotels,
Yeah.
some of the retail is in that highest risk that gets a higher ranking as well.
Too bad places like their Yelp rating or something.
We could go to like taste test all that.
Gary, could I try to summarize this simply?
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You folks, the committee took in the applications and came in, and based off of what you know right now, you're recommending that these buckets be in the dollar amounts that they are based on the amount of funding we can provide. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
And if there is any change to that, we'll be notified.
That's correct.
August 12th. Okay. This all seems to me.
In fact, the recommendations will come back to the three of you
Right.
with the names of
Yeah.
those businesses or organizations that we're recommending funding for and the amounts that we're recommending funding with a total for each of the buckets. So, yes, you'll get a very comprehensive report, and you'll get that in advance of voting on it, so you'll have to look at it.
Okay. I have no further questions. I'm fine with what you're recommending.
And Gary, at some point in time, before we vote, I would personally like to have the entire list of who applied,
Okay?
and then, who was removed and who is approved.
That will be on there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And in that, I'll just put in a plug that commissioners aren't gonna be picking winners and losers, but, there's not very many good barbecue restaurants right now. Not a lot of competition, so you have to take that into consideration there, right? If nobody else has any questions, we do have a request for action on the recommendations, so I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the funding category allocation recommendations presented to us today.
I'm gonna second that motion, and I think we should amend it though, just stating that we, understand that those recommendations could change as we move forward.
like to see these formalized as preliminary recommendations.
Right.
So,
Let me withdraw the motion, let me rephrase the motion. I'll make a motion to approve the draft category allocation recommendations as presented today, with the understanding that such category recommendations could be changed.
I will second that motion.
okay, moved and seconded, all in favor indicate by say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Very good briefing.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank all of you for your tremendous work on this. I know this is not easy. Sounds to me like we compare very favorably to where a lot of the other counties are right now in terms of schedule and the robustness of our program. So a lot of thanks goes to you guys.
We're way ahead of a lot.
But that,
We're way ahead of a lot of them.
So, okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Any additional business to come before the group?
I have nothing.
Nothing, staff? Okay, we just provide an opportunity for public comment. If anybody wants to offer public comment for the record, now's your time. I don't see any hands going up, so with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We